Well, back in 2005 now, Tony had a stroke, but the kind of stroke that he had was not where one side of the body is affected, it was the whole body. The only thing he could move was his eyes, and he couldn't speak. He ate after a fashion, but he couldn't drink or anything like that. So basically he was sort of in a dead body. The body had no function at all. He was a very outgoing sort of person, you know, life and soul of the party, ex-rugby player, and it just wasn't the life for him. He just didn't want to go on living like it, and he told me that as soon as we started being able to communicate with the iBlink board that we had. And it was one of the first things he told me, that he didn't want to live like it, and it just wasn't good enough for him. Not saying that it isn't good enough for other people, it was what he wanted, it was his life. So this is when we took on the challenge with the law. He was in hospital in Athens for a couple of months, so I mean we couldn't commute on. He was in intensive care for almost a month of that. But once he got back to the UK and we got speech therapy and everything, they brought this board out. It's called an e-tran with all the letters on, and he used to blink at the letters. And after a little while, I mean, we got really good at it, you know. I mean, more often than not, it's like predicted text, you know. He'd start a word off and I could finish it off for him. So we got really quick at it. He was a very outspoken person, you know. He was very opinionated. And for him, I think if he could have been able to speak, I think things would have been different. I think possibly he wouldn't have felt the way he did. But I don't think you can understand how it is when, you know, one day you can chat and all the rest of it, and the next day you can't. You know, it's that quick. He just used to get so frustrated because if he couldn't make himself understood, it didn't very often happen with me because I was so good with the board, but when he was trying to communicate with other people, with the carers and that, he couldn't make himself understood, and he just used to get so frustrated, you know. I mean, he'd be crying with frustration, and it was probably something quite simple, you know, that he wanted. But we had the board, and then eventually we got the iBlink computer that was amazing. We used to, if he wanted something, he'd usually send me an email or something, because that was sort of easier to do that than if it was something complicated, than to go through with the board. But I think the inability to communicate was by far the worst thing, far worse than not being able to move. We got quite good at communicating after a while, but we never really had conversations after that because it was just too difficult. If he wanted something, he'd let me know. I mean, I'd go in there and talk to him, but it was almost like I tried very hard not to be talking at him, you know. And it's very difficult, you know, it was hugely difficult for him. And he became very withdrawn as well. He was someone that was always, he was always out and about doing things on committees and things like that. And it got to a point where he wouldn't see anyone at all for a long time. And then when he came home, I sort of tried talking him into seeing his old mates, you know, his old schoolmates that he was in contact with. And he did for a little while, but after a while he said no more. He said he couldn't stand being sat in a room with a load of people chatting when he couldn't chat. And he said after that, he said he'd say hello to people, but that was it. He didn't want to see people after that. So he was very, very withdrawn. Of course I didn't want him to die, but I didn't want him to go on suffering more than that. I don't think people don't know what goes on behind closed doors and all the indignities he had to go through, you know, every day of his life. So it's, you know, it's quite simply, it's because I loved him that I supported him.